He made cigarettes in the dark, then lit them and passed one to her. The room held her scent, fresh lilac, pathetic. The smell of the desert had overlaid it. He realized he was afraid of the desert ahead. "His name is Nort," she said. No harshness had been worn out of her voice. "Just Nort. He died." The gunslinger waited. "He was touched by God." The gunslinger said, "I have never seen him." "He was here ever since I can remember. Nort, I mean, not God." She laughed jaggedly into the dark. "He had a honey wagon for a while, started to drink, started to smell the grass, then smoke it. The kids started to follow him around and sick their dogs onto him. He wore old green pants that stank. Do you understand?" "Yes." "He started to chew it. At the last he just sat in there and just didn't eat anything. He might have been a king in his mind. The children might have been his jesters and the dog his princes." "Yes." "He died right in front of this place," she said. "Came clumping down the boardwalk. His boots wouldn't wear out. They were engineer boots he found in the old train yard, with the children and the dogs behind him. He looked like wire cloth hangers all wrapped and twirled together. You could see all the lights of hell in his eyes, but he was grinning, just like the grins of the children carve into the sharp roots and pumpkins come reap. You could smell the dirt and the rot and the weed. It was running down from the corners of his mouth like green blood. I think he meant to come in and listen to Shep play the piano. And right in front he stopped and cocked his head. I could see him, and I thought he heard a coach, although there was none due. Then he puked, and was black and full of blood. I went right through that grin like sewer water through a grate. The stink was enough to make you want to run mad. He raised his arms and just flew over. That was all. He died in his own vomit with that grin on his face." "A nice story." "Oh yes, thank you, Cy. This be a nice place." She was trembling beside him. Outside the wind kept up in steady whine, and somewhere far away a door was banging, like a sound heard in a dream. Mice ran in the walls. The gunslinger thought in the back of his mind that it was probably the only place in town prosperous enough to support mice. He put a hand on her belly and she started violently, then relaxed. "The man in black," he said. "You have to have it, don't you? You couldn't just throw me a fuck and go to sleep." "I have to have it." "All right, I'll tell you." She grasped his hand in both of hers and told him. 7. He came in the late afternoon of the day Nort died, and the wind was whooping it up, pulling away the loose topsoil, sending sheets of grit and uprooted stalk of corn windmilling past. Jubal Kinnerly had pocketed the Liberty, and a few other merchants had shut down their windows and laid boards across the shutters. The sky was the yellow of old cheese, and the clouds flew across it as if they had seen something horrifying in the desert's wastes where they had so lately been. The gunslinger's quarry came in a rickety rig with a ripping trap tied across its bed. There was a big howdy-do of a grin on his face. They watched him come, an old man Kinnerly, lying by the window with a bottle in one hand and the loose, hot flesh of his second eldest daughter's left breast in the older, resolved not to be there if he should knock. But the man in black went without slowing the bay that pulled his rig, and the spinning wheels sumped up the dust that the wind clutched eagerly. He might have been a priest or a monk. He wore a black robe that had been floured with the dust, and a loose hood covered his head and obscured his features, but not that horrid happy grin. The robe rippled and flapped. From beneath the garment's hem there peeped a heavily buckled boots with square toes. He pulled up in front of Sheb's and teetered the horse, which lowered its head and grunted at the ground. Around the back of the rig he untied one flap, found a weathered saddlebag, threw it over his shoulder, and went through the bat wings. Alice watched him curiously, but no one else noticed his arrival. The regulars were drunk as lords, Sheb was playing Methodist hymn ragtime, and the grizzled layabouts who had come in early to avoid the storm and to attend North's wake had sung themselves hoarse. Sheb, drunk nearly to the point of senselessness, intoxicated, and horny with his own continued existence, played with a hectic shuttlecock speed, fingers flying like looms. Voices screeched and hollered, near overcoming the wind, but sometimes seeming to challenge it. In the corner, Zachary had thrown Amy Felden's skirts over her head and was painting reap charms on her knees. A few other women circulated. A fever seemed to be on all of them. The dull storm glow that filtered through the batwings seemed to mock them, however. Nord had been laid out on 2 tables in the center of the room. His engineering boots made a mystical V. His mouth hung open in a slack grin, although someone had closed his eyes and put slugs on them. His hands had been folded on his chest with a sprig of devilgrass in them. He smelled like poison. The man in black pushed back his hood and came to the bar. Alice watched him, feeling trepidation mixed with the familiar want that hid within her. There was no religious symbol on him, although that meant nothing by itself. "Whiskey," he said. His voice was soft and pleasant. "I want the good stuff, honey." She reached under the counter and brought out the bottle of Star. She could have palmed off the local popskull on him as her best, but didn't. She poured, and the man in black watched her. His eyes were large, luminous. The shadows were too thick to determine their color exactly. Her need intensified. The hollering and whooping went on behind, unabated. Shep, the worthless gelding, was playing about the Christian soldiers, and somebody had persuaded Aunt Mill to sing. Her voice, warped and distorted, cut through the babble like a dull through a calf's brain. "Hey, Allie!" She went to serve, resentful to the stranger's silence, resentful of his no-color eyes and her own restless groin. She was afraid of her needs. They were capricious and beyond her control. They might be signals of change, which would in turn signal the beginning of her old age, a condition which in Tull was usually as short and as bitter as winter sunset. She drew beer until the keg was empty, then broached another. She knew better than to ask Shep. He would come willingly enough, like a dog that he was, and would either chop off his own fingers or spume beer all over everything. The stranger's eyes were on her, and she went about it. She could feel them. "It's busy," he said when she returned. He had not touched his drink, merely rolled it between his palms to warm it. "Wake," she said. "I noticed the departed. They're bums," she said with sudden hatred. "Oh, bums. It excites them. He's dead. They're not. He was their butt when he was alive. It's not right that he should be their butt now. It's..." She trailed off, not able to express what it was, or how it was obscene. "Weed eater?" "Yes. What else did he have?" Her tone was accusing, but he did not drop his eyes, and she felt the blood rush to her face. "I'm sorry, are you a priestess must revolt you?" "I'm not, and it doesn't." He knocked up the whiskey back neatly and did not grimace. Once more, please. Once more with feeling, as they say in the world next to the door." He had no idea what that might mean, and was afraid to ask. "I'll have to see the color of your coin first. I'm sorry." "No need to be." He put a rough silver coin on the counter, thick on one edge, thin on the other, and she said she would say later, "I don't have change for this." He shook his head, dismissing it, and watched absently as she poured again. "Are you only passing through?" she asked. He did not reply for a long time, and she was about to repeat when he shook his head impatiently. "Don't talk trivialities. You're here with death." She recoiled, hurt and amazed, her first thought being that he had lied about his holiness to test her. "You cared for him," he said flatly. "Isn't that true?" "Who? Nord?" She laughed, affecting annoyance to cover her confusion. "I think you better..." "You're soft-hearted and a little afraid," he went on. "And he was on the weed. looking out hell's back door. And there he is. They've even slammed the door now, and you don't think they'll open it until it's time for you to walk through, isn't it so? What, are you drunk? Mr. Norton, he dead, the man in black intoned, giving the words a sardonic little twist. Dead as anybody, dead as you or anybody. Get out of my place. She felt tremble loathing in spring in her, but the warmth still radiated from her belly. It's all right, he said softly. It's all right. Wait, just wait. The eyes were blue. She felt suddenly ease in her mind, as if she had taken a drug. Dead as anybody, he said. Do you see? She nodded dumbly, and he laughed aloud. A fine, strong, untainted laugh that swung heads around. He whirled and faced them, suddenly the center of attention. Aunt Mill faltered and subsided, leaving the crack-high note bleeding on the air. Sheb struck a discord and halted. They looked at the stranger uneasy. Sand rattled against the sides of the building. The silence held, spun itself out. Her breath had clogged in her throat, and she looked down and saw both hands pressed to her belly beneath the bar. They all looked at him, and he looked at them. Then the laugh burst forth again, strong, rich, beyond denial. But there was no urge to laugh along with him. I'll show you all a wonder, he cried at them. But they only watched him, like obedient children taken to have seen a magician show in whom they had grown too old to believe. The man in black sprung forward, and Aunt Mill drew away from him. He grinned fiercely and slapped her broad belly. A short, unwitting cackle was forced out of her, and the man in black threw back his head. Is that better? Aunt Mill cackled again, suddenly broken into sobs, and fled blindly through the doors. The others watched her go silently. The storm was beginning. Shadows followed each other, rising and falling on the white cyclorama of the sky. A man near the piano, with a forgotten beer in one hand, made a groaning, slobbering sound. The man in black stood over Nort, grinning down at him. The wind hollowed and shrieked and thrummed. Something large struck the side of the building, hard enough to make it shake, and then bounced away. One of the men at the bar tore himself free and headed for some quieter locale, moving in great grotesque strides. Thunder racked the sky with a sound like some god coughing. All right, the man in black grinned. All right, let's get down to it. He began to spit in Nort's face, aiming carefully. The spittle gleamed on the corpse's forehead, purled down the shaven beak of his nose. Under the bar, her hands worked faster. Sheb laughed, loon-like, and hunched over. He began to cough up phlegm, huge and sticky globs of it, and let fly. The man in black roared approval and pounded him on the back. Sheb grinned, one gold tooth twinkled. Some fled. Others gathered in a loose ring around Nort. His face and the dew-lapped rooster's wrinkles of his neck and upper chest gleamed with liquid so precious in this dry country. And suddenly the rain of spit stopped, as if on a signal. There was ragged, heavy breathing. The man in black suddenly lunged across the body, jackknifing over it in a smooth arc. It was pretty, like a flash of water. He caught himself on his hand, sprang to his feet in a twist, grinning, and went over again. One of the watchers forgot himself, began to applaud, and suddenly backed away, eyes cloudy with terror. He slobbed a hand across his mouth and made for the door. Nort twitched the third time the man in black went across. A sound went through the watchers, a grunt, and then they were silent. The man in black threw his head back and howled. His chest moved in a quick, shallow rhythm as he sucked air. He began to go back and forth at a faster clip, pouring over Nort's body like water poured over the glass to another, and then back again. The only sound in the room was the tearing rasp of his respiration and the rising pulse of the storm. There came the moment when Nort drew a deep, dry breath. His hands rattled and pounded aimlessly on the table. Sheb screeched and exited. One of the women followed him, her eyes wide and her wimple bellowing. The man in black went across once more, twice, thrice. The body was on the table. That was on the table was now vibrating. trembling and rapping and twitching like a large yet essentially lifeless doll with some monstrous clockwork hidden inside. The smell of rotten excrement and decay billowed up in choking waves. There came a moment when his eyes opened. Allie felt her numb and feelingless feet propelling her backward. She struck the mirror, making it shiver, and blind panic took over. She bolted like a steer. "So there's your wonder," the man in black called after her, panting. "I've given it to you. Now you can sleep easy. Even that isn't irreversible. Although, it's so goddamn funny." And he began to laugh again. The sound faded as she raced up the stairs, not stopping until the door to the 3 rooms above the bar was bolted. She began to giggle, rocking back and forth on her haunches by the door. The sound rose to an keening wail that mixed with the wind. She kept hearing the sound of the sound that Nort had made when he had come back to life, the sound of fists knocking blindly on the lid of a coffin. What thoughts, she wondered, could be left in his reanimated brain? What he had seen while dead? How much did he remember? Would he tell? Were the secrets of the grave waiting downstairs? The most terrible thing about such questions, she reckoned, was that part of you really wanted to ask. Below her, Nort wandered absently out into the storm to pull some weed. The man in black, now the only patron in the bar, perhaps watched him go, perhaps still grinning. When she forced herself to go back down that evening, carrying a lamp in one hand and a heavy stick of a stove wood in the other, the man in black was gone, rig and all. But Nort was there, sitting at the table by the door as if he had never been away. The smell of weed was on him, but not as heavily as she might have expected. He looked up at her and smiled tentatively. "Hello, Ellie!" "Hello, Nort." She put store wood back down and began lighting the lamps, not turning her back to him. "I've been touched by God," he said presently. "I ain't going to die no more. He said so. It was a promise." "How nice for you, Nort." The spill she was holding dropped through her trembling fingers and she picked it up. "I'd like to stop chewing the grass," he said. "I don't enjoy it no more. It doesn't seem right for a man touched by God to be chewing the weed." "Then why don't you stop?" Her expression had startled her into looking at him as a man again, rather than an infernal miracle. What she saw was a rather sad-looking specimen of only a half-stoned-looking hand-dog, and ashamed. She could not be frightened by him anymore. "I shake," he said, "and I want it. I can't stop. Allie, you was always good to me." He began to weep. I can't even stop peeing myself. What am I? What am I?" She walked to the table and hesitated there, uncertain. "He could have made me not want it," he said through the tears. "He could have done it if he could have made me be alive. I ain't complaining. I don't want to complain." He started on hauntedly and whispered, "He might strike me dead if I did." "Maybe it's a joke. He seemed to have quite a sense of humor." Nort took his poke from where it dangled inside his shirt and brought it out a handful of grass. Unthinkingly, he knocked it away and then drew her hand back, horrified. I can't help it, Allie. I can't." And he made a crippled dive for the poke. She could have stopped him, but she made no effort. She went back to lighting the lamps, tired although the evening had barely begun. But nobody came in that night except old man Kinnerly, who had missed everything. He did not seem particularly surprised to see Nort. Perhaps someone had told him what had happened. He ordered beer, asked her where Sheb was, and pawed her. Later, Nort came to her and held out a folded piece of paper in one shaky, no right to be alive hand. "He left this for you," he said. I near forgot. If I'd forgot, he would have come back and killed me for sure." Paper was valuable, a commodity much to be treasured, but she didn't like to handle this. It felt heavy, nasty. Written on it was a single word: Allie. "How did he know my name?" she asked Nort, and Nort only shook his head. She opened it and read this: "You want to know about death? I left him a word. The word is 19. If you say it to him, his mind will be opened. He will tell you what lies beyond. He will tell you what he saw. The word is 19. Knowing you will drive you mad, but sooner or later you will ask. You won't be able to help yourself. Have a nice day. Walter O'Dim. P.S. The word is 19. You will try to forget, but sooner or later it will come out of your mouth like vomit. 19. And oh dear God, she knew that she would. Already it trembled on her lips. 19, she would say. Nort, listen. 19. And the secrets of death and the land beyond would be open to her. Sooner or later, you will ask. The next day things were almost normal, although none of the children followed Nort. The day after that, the catcalls resumed. Life had gotten back on its own sweet keel. The uprooted corn was gathered together by the children, and a week after Nort's resurrection, they burned it in the middle of the street. The fire was momentarily bright, and most of the barflies stepped or staggered out to watch. They looked primitive. Their faces seemed to float between the flames and the ice-chip brilliance of the sky. Ali watched them and felt a pang of fleeting despair for the sad times of this world. The loss. Things had stretched apart. There was no glue at the center anymore. Somewhere something was tottering, and when it fell, all would end. She had never seen the ocean, never would. If I had guts, she murmured. If I had guts, guts, guts. Nord raised his head at the sound of her voice and smiled emptily at her from hell. She had no guts, only a bar and a scar, and a word. It struggled behind her closed lips. Suppose she were to call him over now and draw him close despite his stink. Suppose she said the word in the waxy buggerlug he called an ear. His eyes would change. They would turn into his eyes, the man in the black robe. And then Nort would tell her what he had seen in the land of death, what lay beyond the earth and the worms. I'll never say that word to him. But the man who had brought Nort back to life and left her a note, left her a word like a cocked pistol she would someday put to her temple, had known better. 19 would open the secret. 19 was the secret. She caught herself writing in the puddle of the bar, 19, and skidded it to nothingness when she saw Nort watching her. The fire burned rapidly, and her customers had come back in. She began to douse herself in star whiskey, and by midnight she was blackly drunk. Thank you for watching part 4, episode 4, or part 4, whatever you want to call it, of the Gunslinger. Apparently I'm actually doing this daily. So with that, I'll see you tomorrow.